Britain is a tolerant country whose people are driven by an innate sense of fairness. Do not lose sight of that. The internet has become an organising tool, a worldwide amplifier, and a window on the worst of society, catalysed by misinformation, spiralling out of control at the swipe of an app and the tap of a retweet. Social media needs to be issued with an ASBO. It is no longer social. The vitriol fuelled, channelled and expressed on X is being fuelled and channelled and expressed in the direction of Sir Keir Starmer by the owner of the site. X describes itself as the global town square, but the town square is now hosting riots day in, day out. The town square is burning. There is no policing of Elon Musk's town square. Indeed, Elon Musk's algorithm is serving up videos of hatred and difficulty with every scroll. It is demoralising. It is unavoidable. Where is the holiday spam I once knew? It's now buried beneath clickbait takes and fiery debates. Where are the memes of lettuces and the sharpest satirising of today's news events? There can be no satirising of the demise of sensible and reasonable conversation. The mob is certainly the minority, but you wouldn't know it when you see the results of Elon Musk's frantic typing. He's outing himself as a demagogue in search of reposts and likes and affection from those who are the worst of us, and that is no ambition at all. Musk is conveying himself as someone who does not speak for the majority of law-abiding British people who want this violence to stop. His town square has no director of public prosecutions. He alone is the judge and jury and executioner. It is he who reinstated the account of the man who goes by the name Tommy Robinson, after all. Their riotous collaboration means the actual Director of Public Prosecutions says today he is willing to consider some rioters be charged with terrorism offences. And what of the former Director of Public Prosecutions, the Prime Minister? He says there is no justification for the comments that hang in the air with the musk of bitter resentment, that a civil war is inevitable. That's what he said. No justification, sure, but he can talk the talk. Can he walk the walk? He's at home talking process, but what does the full force of the law mean to him? Can he heal divisions so viscerally demonstrated online and in the real town squares, primarily in England? Today then, our purpose here with you is to reclaim the media and to make it social again. That's what you'll get on Times Radio as we report and analyse precisely on what is going on. Unlike the unruly wasteland that the internet seems to have become in the last week, this is somewhere that reasonable, sensible discussion will occur. This is Times Radio Drive. I'm Callum MacDonald. Welcome to the programme. Nearly 400 arrests have now been made after riots across the UK. Devon and Cornwall police have given an update on violence in Plymouth that occurred last night.
We will deal with any criminal offence robustly. We will not accept violence on our streets. We were there to facilitate a peaceful protest. People in this country absolutely can have peaceful protests, but we will not accept violence and we will deal with it as the police service.
The violence started after misinformation about a mass stabbing in Southport. This afternoon, we've learned all the surviving children injured in the attack have now been safely discharged from hospital. A glimmer of optimism then, while police prepare for 30 rallies across the country tomorrow. Emergency ad hoc magistrates' courts are being brought in to cope with increased pressures, or at least that's the proposal. Let's discuss the issues at play here. For making all of this work efficiently and effectively, we've got former Justice of the Supreme Court, Lord Savile, with us. Lord Savile, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
It's good to speak with you this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So then, with all of this, the police can identify offenders, they can take them off the streets, but the Director of Public Prosecutions has noted that this is going to involve extra lawyers working around the clock and quite possibly the courts doing the same. Is it time for that to kick into gear?
Well, it seems to me it probably is very close to the time, if not actually at the time. But the government and judiciary, I think, are almost certainly ready, and as far as the judiciary are concerned, willing to put in extra hours and time to deal with this unlawful unrest.
How in reality can that work, Lord Savile? We understand that there are around 400 people who have been arrested, but we must also remember the record backlog of criminal cases, prisons running at 99% of capacity. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But what about the difficulties that the courts are going to have with actually pursuing these people?
Well, there are going to be difficulties, undoubtedly, but what has been done in the past and what will undoubtedly, I think, be done today is to ask the judges, in the main, the magistrates, because they're the first people who will hear these cases, to work longer hours, to work weekends, to work at night. And by that means, I'm reasonably confident that although this is going to put great pressure on the judiciary, it can do the job it's there to do.
As things stand, then, what should we consider about these proposed emergency procedures? That the similar things to what we saw in the 2011 riots in England, as we mentioned, to allow courts to sit overnight, for example. But also, we must consider the justice that's being dished out, should we not? Because I noticed in one article today, lawyers who were practicing during that disorder 13 years ago kind of speak about the brutal response, which saw, for example, a majority of suspects denied bail. Is there a risk here that things become too draconian?
Well, there's always such a risk, but I hope with some common sense and a feeling that justice must be done, we can avoid anything along those lines.
So you wouldn't encourage the idea, for example, of denying bail to suspects from these riots?
Well, it depends entirely on the circumstances of each individual case. There are cases when bail might be properly allowed, and there may well be cases where it is better to refuse bail. But you can't set out a general rule. You must look at the circumstances of each case.
In terms of, I suppose, the pressure that this places on magistrates, is there a concern about, I suppose, the politics that's involved in the riots and indeed in the justice system's processing of those who are facing charges? Does that play on the minds of the judiciary that this has become a very political moment, as well, of course, as one that needs justice served?
Well, I would hope not, because as a judge, your job is simply to apply the law in a just fashion. And whether or not politics play a part should be an irrelevance.
Why do these offenders need swift justice when the backlog means that many thousands of others are waiting for inordinate amounts of time to even have a hope of justice?
A lot of people are waiting an inordinate amount of time, and this is an injustice for them. But the reason for dealing with these cases as quickly as possible is to make clear to those who might be tempted to follow the example of the people who've been rioting. It might persuade them to think twice about doing that. That's the reason.
Yeah, so it's to act as something of a deterrent.
Yes.
Is that an admission that our justice system is not a deterrent right now?
Well, again, it's impossible to generalize on that. It is a deterrent. There's no doubt about it. The justice system has been creaking up the hinges for some time. COVID, of course, caused an enormous delay. And that, as I've just said, is an injustice to the people who are waiting for their cases to be heard. But the justice system will do the best it can. I've no doubt magistrates will be willing to sit long hours, overnight, weekends, and so on, in order to do their best to deal with this very serious problem.
Within all of this, I suppose there's perhaps lesser known offences being discussed as well. Arrests being made for those who stir up violence on social media. It's almost like there's a whole new era of justice being unlocked as a result of what we're witnessing.
Well, I think that's probably so, and that is in turn the result of the use of social media in, among other things, fomenting the sort of rioting that we've seen over the last few days, with misinformation and all the rest of it. So that is something to which the judiciary and indeed the government has to react. It's something reasonably new, and it won't go away.
Interesting to consider, if I may, as well with you, Lord Seville, a kind of broader take on how the Prime Minister is responding to these riots. Of course, he's only been Prime Minister for around a month now, but there is new polling out today from YouGov suggesting that nearly half of voters think that Sir Keir Starmer is handling the riots badly. What would be your broad take?
Well, at the moment, from what I've read in the media, it seems to me that he's doing a perfectly good job.
Understood. Lord Saville, thank you very much. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Very good to speak with you. Thanks for your insight and expertise. I note the new offences, and Lord Saville talks there of a new era of justice. A man has been charged today with intending to stir up racial hatred relating to alleged posts on Facebook. Again, is social media really at the heart of all of this, and do we need to consider our relationship with it? Let's speak to Mark Fairhurst from the Prison Officers Association. Mark, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Callum.
Really good to speak to you. As we say, we're kind of trying to dig into what the justice system needs to do here, what it needs to deliver in order to, well, stop the riots, basically. It emerged this week that that ministers, the government, are looking to bring forward plans to free up new prison places in the next month. What is your understanding at the POA of the expectations upon your members?
Well, we're under a great deal of pressure because most of our prisons are overcrowded and dilapidated. But on the 10th of September, we're due to release probably a couple of thousand prisoners on the early release scheme, which has seen them released at the 40% mark of their sentence, their determinate sentence, rather than the 50%. So that'll free up a lot of space. The additional spaces that you've mentioned there, that's due to a re-roll of a prison, which will now come back into the adult estate. That'll free up about 200 spaces. We have a new unit opening at another prison in the Midlands, which will free up about another 120. And then we've got an additional, I would say at this moment in time, we've got about 1,000 spare spaces in the adult closed male estate, which is where these offenders will end up.
Can you help us understand, Mark, the sort of status, the situation, the context of the prison system? I note that the number of people going into prison each year has dropped from around 80,000 in 2013 to 46,500 in 2023. And so on the face of it, numbers are going down. And I'd like to add to that this idea that the prison system could potentially, I'll get your take on this, it did cope after the riots in 2011. Where do we find ourselves in the wider situation in 2024?
Yes, so people are getting sentenced to longer sentences. So obviously you need more spaces as time goes on. In 2011, we had an additional 10,700 prison spaces. But since that time, the last government closed over 20 public sector prisons, which was, a great loss to us. We lost all those spaces. And how we could do with those spaces now to deal with all this. So we're confident at this moment in time we can cope with what comes our way because we've got that breathing space on the 10th of September. But of course, it depends how swiftly justice is served. Don't forget, you've had 400 arrests, but we haven't had 400 people charged and we haven't had people pleading guilty or remanded into custody. So if that ramps up significantly over the next 3 weeks, then we will struggle quite badly to accommodate people.
Is there a chance, do you think, that the police having to deal with the mobs on the streets curtails their ability to deal with other crimes being committed? I'm quite intrigued by this idea that we are latching onto, that swift justice must be done in the context of these riots. But what does that do to the other parts of the justice system, for those awaiting justice, for those who may be committing crimes now but are perhaps going unnoticed by police?
Yeah, it has a massive knock-on effect for our communities, doesn't it? Because the police are diverted to deal with rioters when they should be dealing with other crimes such as burglaries and robberies. So that has a knock-on effect for our communities. It has a knock-on effect for those who await justice or who are on remand waiting to be sentenced for a crime they've committed because of the backlog in our courts, which currently runs at something like 60,000. So as time goes on, things are delayed more and more. And of course, you've got the cost to the public purse, and especially local councils who have to find the funds from somewhere to clean up this mess. So it creates problems for us in our prisons because most of the offenders who will get convicted will end up in a reception prison, and they're the busiest prisons, and those are the prisons that are most full. So what I envisage to accommodate this, if it does ramp up over the next couple of weeks, yes, we could probably find the space for them, but not necessarily in a place near to their home. You might find someone who gets convicted in the northwest ends up in the southeast or the southwest because that's where the spaces are.
Yeah. Just a final, very quick point, if I may, Mark. At what point, we were talking about around 400 people arrested. There must be a sort of ratio, a percentage that you kind of have in mind as to how many may face charges and may end up at your end of the justice system in prison or for any length of time and whatever stage they're at, remand, etc. Is there a point, a number of arrests that would make you really concerned for the ability of the prison system to cope?
Oh, without a doubt. So if we're looking at, say, 1,000 people over the next 3 weeks either get convicted or remanded into custody, we will really struggle before the 10th of September when we get that breathing space because of SDS 40, that they call it. Standard determined sentences 40 to get released. So anything before the 10th of September, which is significant, and I would call significant, would be 1,000 plus. We are really going to struggle. And it's all right us providing this new accommodation and creating these additional spaces. But we've got to find the staff to run the wings where these additional spaces are. And at the moment, we're in the midst of a staffing crisis.
Of course. Mark, thank you very much indeed. Very good to speak to you. Thanks for your time.
Very welcome.